Clark. Another long three.
To understand the tension, you have to go back to 2022. Picture A'ja Wilson at her peak. Not just good, dominant. 2 MVP trophies already on her shelf. She wasn't climbing to the top of women's basketball. She was the top. Then, Caitlin Clark walked in. She didn't sneak into the league quietly. She arrived with deep threes, sold-out arenas, and a kind of attention women's basketball hadn't seen before. Cameras followed her. Crowds grew louder. The sport itself felt bigger overnight. But here's the thing about Spotlight. It doesn't stretch easily, and not everyone who had worked years to earn their place at the center was ready to step aside. Now, the league holds 2 truths at once: a proven champion who built her throne brick by brick, and a rising force who changed what the game could look like and how many people would show up to watch it. The old era isn't gone. The new one isn't, waiting its turn.
Gatorade State Player of the Year, Big Ten Freshman of the Year, oh, and a 2-time gold medalist. All of these belong to Caitlin Clark.
She had the rings, Las Vegas Aces, back-to-back. Heavy, shining, and earned. Nobody could argue with that. She had the endorsement deals, the magazine covers, the TV analysts who called her the greatest of her generation without pausing to think twice. No debate, no hesitation, just facts. And for a stretch of time, that felt like it would never end. Wilson was the WNBA, not just the best player in it. The whole identity of it. Her name and the league's name had grown so tangled together that you couldn't talk about one without the other. She wasn't just carrying the sport. She was the sport, and she had zero interest in changing that. When she looked at herself, she saw someone who had paid for that spotlight. With years of work, with sacrifice, with a level of play that left no room for argument. The numbers backed her up. The trophies backed her up. Everything backed her up. She hadn't been handed anything. She had taken it the right way, the hard way. And she wasn't about to move over for anyone. The crown fit, and she intended to keep wearing it.
Bodies right through Sherrod in an early bucket for Caitlin Clark.
Every coach, every scout, every general manager in the league respected her. Nobody debated who sat at the top. The seat was Wilson's, the crown was Wilson's, and she planned on keeping both until she decided it was time to walk away. On her terms, nobody else's. And then, Caitlin Clark happened. She didn't arrive the way most rookies do. No quiet entrance, no waiting in line, no politely knocking and asking for a seat at the table. She kicked the door open. Records fell before people even had time to react. Defenders were left standing still, watching a shot arc through the air from 30 feet away that had no business going in, and going in anyway. She didn't look like someone adjusting to the league. She looked like someone who had already decided. She belonged, and the world noticed. Arenas started selling out weeks in advance. Tickets disappeared before most fans even knew the schedule was posted. Television ratings that the WNBA had been chasing for 20 years. She broke them in her first season. Social media, highlight reels, sports bars. Everywhere you looked, it was Clark pulling up from impossible range with a confidence that made people stop and stare. People who had never watched a women's basketball game in their lives were suddenly setting reminders on their phones, fathers and mothers watching with their kids, office workers streaming games on lunch breaks, friends texting each other after buzzer beaters. This wasn't just a good rookie season, this was a cultural moment, and everyone could feel it.
You want to stand for something greater? You have to run.
Something rare was happening, something electric, something that only comes around once in a generation. If you're lucky, and it should have been a celebration for everyone. More eyes on the game meant more money flowing in. More money meant better salaries for every player, better facilities, better broadcasting deals, better futures. The kind of growth the league had been quietly dreaming about for years was suddenly arriving all at once. A rising tide lifts every boat, every single one, And yet, Aja Wilson did not celebrate. She couldn't, because when she turned on the television, she didn't see the sport winning. She saw someone else winning. When she scrolled through the sponsorship announcements, when she watched the commercials, when she saw whose face was on the billboards and whose name was in the headlines, it wasn't hers, it was Clark's. Always Clark, the woman who had spent years building the foundation of this league, who had sacrificed and bled and won to get to the top, was now watching someone else get handed the keys to a house she had spent her entire career constructing. The tide was rising, yes, but it didn't feel like her boat was the one being lifted.
Caitlin Clark about to take it to the bank. The Wall Street Journal reports the basketball superstar is about to sign a Nike endorsement deal worth $28 million.
The magazine features, the sponsorship announcements, the way every analyst now started every sentence with Clark's name and only got to Wilson's after. Something inside her shifted, not toward support, not toward pride in what the sport was becoming, not toward the understanding that this moment was bigger than any one player. It shifted toward resentment, and that shift, quiet at first, almost invisible, would eventually cost her everything she had spent her career building when jealousy becomes visible. Here's the thing about jealousy that Aja Wilson never seemed to learn, the thing everyone watching could already see, even when she couldn't. Jealousy never stays hidden. You can dress it up in careful words. You can wrap it in talk about respect and recognition and competitive fire. You can tell yourself what you're feeling is righteous anger, not wounded pride. You can build a whole story in your head where you're the one being wronged. But jealousy leaks. It always leaks. No matter how many layers of justification you pile on top, it finds the cracks. It seeps through. It shows up in interviews, in body language, in the small moments you think nobody is paying attention to. And Wilson's leaked everywhere. When Clark signed her Nike deal in 2024, her own signature shoe, her own line, her own place in a conversation usually reserved for the biggest names in all of sports, Wilson couldn't hide it, and the world was watching.
There's Caitlin Clark out of the timeout for the lead for Iowa.
And not just any deal, one that seemed to jump ahead of Wilson's own negotiations with the same brand. Wilson's response? A Bible verse posted on social media. Something about being patient when others find success. She never mentioned Clark by name. She didn't need to. The timing said everything. And the internet, which notices everything, noticed immediately. Then Clark was named Time Magazine's Athlete of the Year for 2024. Think about what that moment meant. A women's basketball player on the biggest media stage in America, proof that the sport had finally, genuinely arrived. It should have felt like a win for every woman who had ever laced up in this league. Wilson's response was not celebration. It was not pride. It was careful, quiet, loaded skepticism. The kind of non-support that actually says more than open criticism ever could. A few words arranged just right to let everyone know exactly how she felt, while giving her just enough cover to deny it. In interviews, she started leaning on phrases like sustained excellence and real impact, words that sounded neutral on the surface but were clearly drawing a line, separating herself from Clark, reminding everyone who had actually put in the work. She started posting throwback highlights of her own championships, always timed perfectly to land right on top of Clark's biggest moments, not as celebration, not as nostalgia, as a rebuttal, a correction nobody had asked for. It leaked in her press conference answers. It leaked in the passive-aggressive posts that kept coming, growing more pointed every time Clark's star climbed a little higher. It leaked in the way she would quietly change the subject whenever a reporter mentioned Clark's name, and slowly, the public started to see it clearly. Wilson was making a critical mistake, one that champions rarely recover from. She was taking every Caitlin Clark achievement and turning it into a personal attack on her own legacy. She was making someone else's success about herself, and nothing shrinks a champion faster than that.
As a coach, as Evans comes up with a steal on a loose handle from Bonner and buries the three.
She told herself she was defending the veterans, standing up for the women who had built this league from nothing, with no money, no cameras, and no guarantee anyone was ever going to show up. And there was some truth in that. The history of the WNBA is the history of black women who created something extraordinary out of almost nothing. That history deserves its respect every single day, without question. But underneath the noble language, underneath the cause and the moral framing, something else was happening. Wilson was protecting her ego because someone younger had arrived, someone more marketable, someone with a different kind of energy that pulled cameras and crowds and conversations in a direction Wilson couldn't control, and she couldn't handle it. The most dangerous part wasn't the jealousy itself. The most dangerous part was that Wilson genuinely believed nobody could see it. She thought the mask was holding. She thought the careful wording and the Bible verses and the throwback posts were doing their job. They weren't. The mask was see-through, and the people who mattered most, the ones sitting in front offices, the ones making decisions with cold eyes and spreadsheets, were watching, quietly, carefully, taking very detailed notes. Built for the league. Not the world now. We get into territory that mainstream basketball media almost never touches. The kind of analysis that makes front offices shift in their seats and player agents reach for their phones. Everyone talks about Wilson's dominance, and they should. 4 MVPs, 3 championships, and then 2025, a season that had never been done before in WNBA or NBA history, league title, finals MVP, regular season MVP, defensive player of the year, all 4, same season. One player. On paper, her resume doesn't just belong in a conversation, it belongs in a museum. But paper doesn't play basketball on an international court, because underneath the trophies, underneath the records, there is a problem with Wilson's game that becomes very clear once you understand how global competition actually works. A problem the WNBA system has quietly been covering up for years. Insiders call it the special whistle. Look at her free throw attempts in a typical WNBA season.
In Seattle, won a couple of championships together. Wilson sees a lane, lays it in.
The numbers are staggering, year after year, consistently among the highest free throw attempts in the entire league. On the surface, that looks impressive. It looks like dominance, like a player so unstoppable that defenders have no choice but to grab and hold and hope. But watch the film, not the highlights, not the broadcast angles carefully selected to tell a clean story. The actual film, frame by frame, possession by possession, drive by drive. What you see is different. What you see is a player who has become extremely good at something that has nothing to do with scoring, something that lives in the gray area. Between skill and theater, she has mastered the art of finding marginal contact, the kind that is barely there, the kind that in any other league, on any other court, with any other referee, would be swallowed and played through without a second thought, and then selling it, arms flying, body collapsing, eyes finding the official before she even hits the floor. It is not accidental. It is not instinct. It is a craft, practiced and refined over years until it became second nature, until the referees stopped questioning it, until the whistle became almost automatic. The WNBA system, built around its biggest star, had quietly learned to accommodate it. But international referees didn't get that memo.